Imagine a man sitting alone at his kitchen table late at night, staring at a pile of unpaid bills, his head buried in his hands, wondering if life will ever give him a break. This is where our story begins. Before we dive in, let me remind you, if you believe in stories that touch the heart and celebrate resilience, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Threads of Kindness right now so you never miss an inspiring journey like this one. Now, meet Daniel, a man who never imagined he would be raising his little daughter, Emily, on his own. Just a year ago, life looked so different. There was laughter in the house, warm dinners at the table, and the comfort of two parents sharing the load. But fate has its own ways of testing us. After a tragic accident claimed the life of his wife, Daniel was left to pick up the shattered pieces of his world, holding on to nothing but the tiny hand of his 4-year-old daughter. He didn't know how to cook more than instant noodles, he had no idea how to braid Emily's hair, and his job at the local hardware store barely paid enough to keep food on the table, let alone cover rent, utilities, and daycare. His nights were sleepless, not because of noise, but because of the heavy silence that reminded him of everything he had lost. He'd wake up each morning to Emily's innocent smile, and though her hugs gave him strength, he knew she deserved so much more than the broken man he had become. The days blurred into each other, rushing to work, hurrying to pick Emily up, scraping together dinner, and collapsing into bed just to do it all over again. Friends slowly drifted away, some didn't know what to say, others didn't know how to help. Daniel found himself drowning in loneliness, hiding his tears so Emily wouldn't see. But even in the middle of all this pain, there was one thing that refused to die inside him, the love he had for his daughter. It became his anchor, the fire that kept him moving forward, no matter how heavy the weight. Still, he couldn't shake the thought that he was failing her. One evening, after another grueling day, Daniel came home to find Emily sitting at the table with her crayons, scribbling something on paper. When he asked what she was drawing, she looked up with her big brown eyes and said softly, "It's us, Daddy. You and me. Don't worry, we're going to be okay." That tiny voice pierced through his despair like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. For the first time in months, Daniel felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind him that giving up was not an option. He had to find a way, no matter what, to turn their life around. And so, with trembling hands and a heart still healing, Daniel made a promise to himself and to Emily, that he would fight, learn, and grow until he could give her the life she deserved. He didn't know how yet, but he knew why. And sometimes, that's the spark that begins a whole new journey. The days that followed Daniel's promise to himself were anything but easy. In fact, life seemed determined to push him even harder, as if testing whether his resolve was real or just a fleeting moment of hope. He woke before dawn, dragging his tired body to prepare Emily's lunch, dressing her in clothes that never quite matched because he hadn't yet figured out what little girls like to wear, and rushing her to daycare before heading to the hardware store. There, he worked long hours stacking boxes, helping customers, and smiling through exhaustion because he couldn't afford to lose the one steady income he had. But even with his endless effort, the numbers never added up. The rent was overdue, the fridge was nearly empty, and every bill that arrived in the mailbox felt like another nail in the coffin of his hopes. On the nights he worked late shifts, he would pick Emily up with a heavy heart, knowing she had waited far too long for him. One night she looked at him with sleepy eyes and asked, "Daddy, why are you always so tired? Don't you like playing with me anymore?" Those innocent words shattered him more than any overdue bill ever could. He realized that while he was fighting for survival, Emily was quietly longing for the father she once knew, the one who laughed, played, and tucked her in with silly bedtime stories. It was then Daniel understood that success wasn't just about paying bills, it was about being present for his daughter. But how could he balance it all? How could one man carry the weight of two lives? Every weekend, Daniel tried to make up for the lost time by taking Emily to the park or reading her favorite storybook, though sometimes he would doze off mid-sentence, his body unable to keep up with his determination. There were moments he wanted to break down completely. He would lock himself in the bathroom for a few minutes, pressing his forehead against the cool tile wall, fighting back tears so Emily wouldn't see the cracks in his armor. And yet, no matter how exhausted or broken he felt, one thought echoed in his mind: "She needs me." That thought became his shield, his reason to stand up every time life tried to knock him down. But the pressure didn't stop at home. At work, his boss began noticing his fatigue, his slower pace, and his distracted mind. Whispers of, "maybe he can't handle it," floated around the store. Fear of losing his job consumed him. One evening, Daniel sat staring at his pay stub, realizing that even with all his effort, it wasn't enough. He couldn't keep living on the edge of collapse. Something had to change. That night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Daniel sat down at his kitchen table with a notebook and pen. For the first time, instead of drowning in despair, he started writing out ideas, what skills he had, what opportunities might exist, and what small steps he could take to build a better future. It wasn't a miracle solution, but it was the first moment he took control rather than letting life control him. He knew this road wouldn't be easy, but he also knew that if he kept waiting for life to magically get better, Emily would grow up watching her father stuck in struggle. He refused to let that happen. And so, Chapter 2 of Daniel's life closed not with answers, but with a decision, the decision to fight harder, to search for opportunities beyond his current world, and to believe that even in the darkest of times, there was a path forward. Because sometimes, the greatest success stories don't start with triumph, they start with a man on his knees, choosing to rise again. Change often begins in the quietest of moments, and for Daniel, it started one rainy evening when he ducked into the public library with Emily. They were supposed to just wait out the storm, but while Emily played in the children's corner, Daniel wandered through the shelves, his tired eyes landing on a book about starting small businesses with limited resources. Out of curiosity, he flipped through the pages, not realizing that this simple act was about to change the course of his life. The words spoke directly to his struggles, ordinary people who had turned hardships into opportunities by using skills they already had. Something inside him stirred. Could he do this too? He remembered how much he loved fixing things, how neighbors often came to him when their chairs wobbled, their locks jammed, or their shelves broke. Repair work had always come naturally to him, and suddenly, he wondered if this could be more than just a hobby. That night, after tucking Emily into bed, Daniel stayed up until dawn, scribbling notes, making lists, and sketching out the possibility of turning his skill into a side business. For the first time in months, he wasn't drowning in fear, he was swimming in possibility. The following weekend, Daniel decided to test his idea. He printed a few flyers that read, "Affordable home repairs, reliable work, local dad you can trust." He handed them out in his neighborhood and posted a few at the grocery store, the church bulletin board, and even the daycare center. At first, silence. A week passed with no calls. Doubt crept back in. Was this just another false hope? But then, one evening, his phone buzzed. A woman needed help fixing a leaky faucet. Nervous but determined, Daniel went over, did the repair, and left with not just a small payment but also a glowing smile from the customer. Word began to spread. Slowly, the calls trickled in, another faucet here, a broken shelf there, a door that needed fixing. The jobs were small, but each one built his confidence. He was no longer just a struggling employee at the hardware store, he was a man building something of his own, piece by piece. Emily noticed the change too. She would watch him pack his tools and beam with pride, telling everyone, "My daddy can fix anything." Her innocent faith in him became the fuel he needed on days when exhaustion tried to drag him down. Every time he saw her smile, he remembered why he had started this journey. Still, the road was far from smooth. There were days he returned home with scraped hands, aching muscles, and barely enough energy to read Emily her bedtime story. Some nights he questioned whether this side hustle would ever grow enough to truly lift them out of poverty. But unlike before, Daniel was no longer sitting in despair, he was moving forward, even if the steps were small. And with every new client, he was proving to himself that he was capable of more than he had ever imagined. One evening, as he sat with Emily at the park, watching her laugh on the swings, Daniel realized something profound. Success wasn't going to come all at once, in some grand miracle. It was already happening, hidden in the quiet victories of each day, the meals he could now afford, the smile on his daughter's face, the pride he felt when neighbors trusted him with their homes. This wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, growth, and the belief that he and Emily deserved a better life. And with that realization, Daniel knew he had crossed a threshold. The man who once sat at his kitchen table in despair was gone. In his place stood someone who believed, truly believed, that brighter days were ahead. This was the turning point, the moment when hope transformed into action, and action began to build a future. The applause thundered through the grand hall, echoing in Amara's chest like the heartbeat of a new beginning. She stood on stage, clutching the sides of the podium, her breaths uneven but her spirit soaring. For the first time that day, she felt seen, not as someone to be doubted, not as someone questioned at a boarding gate, but as a woman whose voice carried weight and purpose. As the crowd slowly settled, she caught sight of James Carter once more, rising from his front row seat and moving toward the stage with deliberate steps. Her pulse quickened. What was he doing? The event host whispered something into the microphone, then gestured toward James. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. James Carter, our keynote sponsor and one of the leading philanthropists in the country." The room erupted in another wave of applause, but Amara froze, stunned. The man who had quietly sat beside her on the plane, who had witnessed her humiliation and spoken to her with simple kindness, was not just another businessman, he was James Carter, a name she had heard whispered in nonprofit circles, known for funding initiatives that empowered underrepresented voices across the globe. James reached the podium, shaking Amara's hand with a firmness that radiated respect, not just courtesy. "Miss Amara," he began, his voice calm but commanding, "your words today moved not only this audience but me personally. You reminded us all that resilience is not just a concept, it's a lived reality, one too often dismissed or overlooked because of prejudices we refuse to confront. What you experienced today, from the moment you stepped into that airport, is the very reason we need leaders like you in the spotlight." The audience leaned in, captivated, murmurs of agreement rippling through the hall. Amara's cheeks burned, her eyes glistening, unsure how to react. James turned to the crowd. "It is easy to judge someone by their appearance, their clothing, their background. But what we forget is that brilliance, strength, and vision rarely wear labels we can recognize at first glance. Today, Amara reminded us, never judge a book by its cover." A roar of applause shook the hall again, and Amara stood there, her heart racing. She felt as though the humiliation at the boarding gate had been rewritten in this moment, her pain transformed into purpose. James placed a hand on her shoulder, his tone softening as he addressed her directly. "You deserve more than just applause, Amara. You deserve a platform." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "I would like to personally offer you a mentorship through my foundation, as well as the resources to expand your reach. Your story deserves to be heard by the world, and I intend to help make that happen." Amara's breath caught in her throat. For years she had fought silently, carrying the weight of doubt, enduring prejudice, questioning her worth. And here was a man whose influence stretched across continents, standing beside her, offering not charity but partnership, recognition, and opportunity. Tears welled in her eyes, and though she tried to blink them away, one slipped down her cheek, betraying the storm of gratitude and disbelief within her. The audience rose to its feet, delivering a standing ovation that lasted longer than any applause she had ever heard. Cameras flashed, journalists scribbled notes, and in that instant, Amara's story leapt beyond the walls of the summit. She wasn't just the girl who had been denied dignity at a boarding gate, she was the voice of resilience, the living proof of why kindness and recognition mattered. Later, as the summit concluded and the crowd dispersed, James and Amara found themselves seated in a quiet lounge. He leaned forward, his eyes sincere. "You may not realize it now, Amara, but today wasn't just a speech, it was a turning point. People will remember what you said, but more importantly, they will remember who you are." Amara smiled softly, her voice trembling with both humility and determination. "All I ever wanted was to show that we belong, no matter where we come from. If my story can open doors for even one other person, then all the struggles were worth it." James nodded, raising his glass of water in a toast. "Then let's make sure your story opens doors for thousands." The night sky stretched wide over New York City, its skyscrapers shimmering like beacons of ambition, but Amara's heart glowed brighter than any tower piercing the heavens. She walked slowly out of the summit venue, her backpack resting lightly on her shoulders, yet it no longer felt like a burden, it felt like a crown she carried proudly. The city buzzed around her with honking taxis, flashing billboards, and hurried footsteps, but in her chest was only a steady, calming rhythm: "You belong, you belong, you belong." The humiliation she had endured at the airport earlier now seemed distant, like a storm cloud dissipated by sunlight. She replayed James Carter's words in her mind, the way he had turned her pain into a platform and her voice into a beacon for others. It felt surreal, almost dreamlike, that the very man who had silently witnessed her struggle was now the ally who amplified her strength. Yet deep down, she knew this was no accident. Life had a way of testing her spirit, then sending unexpected hands to lift her higher. As she reached the curb to hail a cab, a voice called her name, gentle yet firm. She turned to find James once more, walking toward her with an envelope in hand. Amara, he said, extending it, this is just the beginning. Inside are details for the fellowship program at my foundation. We'll fund your initiatives, connect you with global leaders, and give you the stage your story deserves. But more than that, we'll ensure the world sees you for who you are, not who they assume you to be. Amara took the envelope with trembling fingers, overcome by a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly brought her to her knees. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered, her voice catching in her throat. James smiled softly, his eyes kind. Live your truth, Amara. That's thanks enough. For a moment, silence hung between them, not heavy but sacred, a promise forged in shared understanding. Then James stepped back, blending into the night with the ease of someone accustomed to moving in and out of the spotlight, leaving Amara standing beneath the glow of a streetlight, the envelope clutched to her chest like a key to a new future. In that quiet moment, she thought of the woman at the boarding gate, of the sideways glances in first class, of all the times people had whispered, "You don't belong." She thought of every door slammed in her face, every doubt cast upon her shoulders, every silent prayer whispered into the night. And she smiled, not out of bitterness, but out of triumph. They were wrong. She did belong. And now, she was going to make sure no one else would ever doubt it again. Days later, clips of her speech spread across social media, her words striking chords around the world. Headlines declared, "Young Black Woman Redefines Resilience at Global Summit." Comment sections flooded with praise, and stories poured in from others who had faced prejudice but found courage through her example. Amara became not just a speaker but a symbol, her story igniting conversations in boardrooms, classrooms, and households alike. And somewhere, perhaps at another airport gate, another young girl of color would lift her chin a little higher, knowing someone had already carved a path before her. Amara's journey was far from over, it was only beginning. But as she looked out of her cab window at the glittering skyline of New York, she whispered a vow to herself, "Never again will I let anyone write my story for me. From now on, I hold the pen." And so, dear viewers, if this story has touched your heart, if it reminded you that kindness, resilience, and justice still matter in a world that too often forgets them, then I invite you right now to like this video and subscribe to Threads of Kindness so you never miss another story that could change your perspective, and maybe even your life. Together, let's keep spreading voices like Amara's and prove that love and courage will always rise above prejudice.